reporter of what goes on inside these facilities, and having Johnny to share with us his story, a very personal memoir in a bizarre way of what the experience is really, it's rare to have this exposure to see what is going on inside these facilities. I hope that all of you, at the end of this program, go and stand in a representation cell that has been built upstairs, because you can see out through that plastic, but even with that capacity, it is chilling to be inside there, and it is a frightening example of what it might feel like if, in fact, we're in that cell. I think that President Obama's executive order, which signed in January of 2016, banning solitary confinement in federal facilities, was a really important example of federal leadership. And we need federal leadership at this point in time as we are engaged, really, and I think the Eastern State exhibit that is looking at a broader question of mass incarceration is engaging all of us in this national conversation about criminal justice reform. And solitary confinement is a piece of that conversation. The limitation of justice of President Obama's executive order is that within the federal system, there are less than 30 kids who will benefit from that ban. Wow. The good news is there aren't a lot of children who are incarcerated in our federal correctional facilities, but the unfortunate consequence is that we have a very limited reach of what President Obama did through that leadership. There is leadership that we can see in the congressional, at the congressional level. Senator Cory Booker and Rand Paul have introduced bipartisan legislation to similarly ban solitary confinement in ways that would reach into the state systems, but of course that legislation is not moving through Congress. At a state level, we remain a country that tolerates the solitary confinement of both children and adults. At this point, we have about 20 states, Solomon was concerned for specific information, about 20 states that have banned solitary confinement of children, but those bans take different forms. So it may be that a particular state might ban the use of solitary confinement limited to a period of days or a period of weeks. It may limit it to a period of hours. But the challenge that I think we face as a community, as engaged citizens who are concerned about these kinds of issues, is again, if you go and stand in that cell upstairs and you imagine a child, imagine your child, your sibling, your niece, your nephew, who is placed in that very small confined space with nothing in it, with a concrete slab to sleep on, with a thin mattress, maybe, with bed sheets, maybe, with personal belongings, maybe or not, maybe nothing at all, no reading materials, no other kinds of stimulation whatsoever, no opportunities for peer interaction. Even a few hours of that kind of unbelievably inhumane confinement of an individual can create the kind of trauma and damage that Naomi has described as an expert, that Johnny has described in terms of what he himself experienced. So we are seeing ways in which we are chipping away at what is a pervasive practice in this country, but there is much work to be done, certainly, going forward.
I had to ask a question. Of the 20 states that banned the use of solitary confinement for juveniles in some form, is Pennsylvania one of them?
Well, so that's an important question, obviously, for those of us sitting here tonight. Pennsylvania, on paper, actually about 35 years ago, as a consequence of litigation that Juvenile Law Center was involved in, appears to have a very progressive stance on solitary confinement of children. We apparently prohibit the use of solitary for a period longer than 4 hours. I use these terms apparently and appear because the reality is what happens so often in correctional systems is that we see even good policies being breached in the application. And so in Pennsylvania, we have a provision that defines solitary confinement as the placement of children in solitary cells without any interaction or opportunity to have this peer or staff engagement. So what we know goes on sometimes still in facilities in Pennsylvania is a child might be placed in a cell and there might be a step person placed outside the door of that cell. The facility doesn't think of it as solitary confinement, and so it goes on and can go on for days at a time, well in excess of what is on paper a very progressive time limit of 4 hours. So yes and no, we have the tools, we have the structure in place to do it well, but we find that we nevertheless can breach that at times.
All right. That's important to know. I want to go back to Richard Ross because we've seen these amazing pictures. We've seen how they speak to us, I think, on a level that's beyond just what we see. So I want to ask you a personal question. What did you know about solitary confinement prior to taking these pictures? How did the act of taking pictures reshape that knowledge for you?
Taking pictures changed me, obviously. As Marsha said, the camera doesn't lie, so I go into some of these places and I don't see signs that say solitary. I see signs that say isolation, timeout room, administrative segregation. So no kids put in isolation. They just put in special programming. And the euphemisms go on and on. At least 20 different words for solitary that are used. After about 5 years of photographing, I contacted the director of a juvenile center in the Midwest, right outside of Kansas City. And I said, would you let me go into your center and be charged as a kid? And they had a wing that I always closed. And they fingerprinted me, they mugged me, they booked me, they put me in what they normally do is for assessment and evaluation. They put me in solitary for 24 hours. I knew I was going to get out after 24 hours. There were 4 buttons. One was for cold water, one was for hot water, which is also cold. One was to flush the toilet, and one was called guard. After 24 hours and eating the prison food, the Juvenile Detention Center, not a prison, I used the toilet. So I pressed the button and asked the guard for toilet paper. And he passed 4 sheets through the trap. It was so dehumanizing, it was unbelievable. I had set up a camera and put time lapse in the corner, and I had 24 hours in isolation, not as a token, but to try to experience it. It was pretty brutal for 24 hours for an adult, but knows he's getting out. For a kid that's taken out their home or school and their normal environment and put here, not for punishment, but for the normal default procedure of assessment and evaluation, it's unimaginable. But to his credit, the director sent me an email December 15th and said, Richard, I want you to know that your actions moved me, and we've eliminated solitary confinement for juveniles in Johnson County, Kansas, and we're retiring operation. If you chip away at this issue, you can get results. Solitary is the low-hanging fruit. It's in the brain. If you see a kid locked in a closet, any adult is going to take the kid out and then try to press charges. It's the adult that puts the kid in. That's the normal response of a normal human being. The mass incarceration of kids and adults is the bigger issue, but the easy one is isolation, and that's the one we really have to focus on and change that policy very quickly.
Okay. Dr. Goldstein, I want to circle back to you because we talked a little bit earlier about Eastern State Penitentiary and how Philadelphia was really one of the early adopters of solitary confinement, and what Dickens said about the slow and daily tampering with the mysteries of the brain. That's why I love writers, and I am one. Because I think he captured something when he said that. What do we know medically about the brains of juveniles that make them susceptible to being damaged by solitary confinement?
Sure. So, in brief, we know that the adolescent brain is developing very rapidly during this period. And it's really a critical period for development in a variety of ways. One of them is, which I'm sure will come as no surprise to anybody here who has ever dealt with an adolescent or been adolescent at some point, but adolescents tend to be very driven by emotion, especially in situations that are emotional. So the emotional portions of the brain are developed quicker than the cognitive controls. And so what that means is when adolescent is in an emotionally arousing setting, they can often be driven into emotional responses rather than having cognitive control jump in and have reasoning help guide their reactions. And so when you think about solitary confinement, one of the things that happens is the adolescent brain is very focused on short-term positive outcomes for behavior. And they really discount the possibility of long-term negative outcomes, right? So better things are going to happen to me if I do them now instead of kind of wait. So there's a lot of risk-taking behavior in adolescence. So what we see in the context of solitary confinement is this is something that's seemingly endless, right? Goes on, and don't know when it's going to end. And even if you do know that time period, whether it's a matter of hours for some kids or days or weeks or months, can feel like it's never going to come to an end. So how do you escape from this? For those kids that are feeling helpless and don't feel connected to anybody, that may be suicide, right? That is a better out. That is a short-term escape from a horrible situation rather than trying to wait the long term to try to think about how you can cope with this. So in that context, I think that's very important. The other piece with the adolescent brain is this really is a critical time for development, and it's not one that we get back. And part of adolescent development is being able to experience normal circumstances, normal social interactions, normal stimulation. And when you're depriving an adolescent brain of that kind of normal stimulation, when do they get to acquire those skills? When they turn 20, when they turn 25, when they turn 30? They don't have an opportunity to backtrack, to have their brain redevelop. And so you want to make sure the adolescent brain is developing within children who are functioning in situations you want them to be able to function in long term. So if we're thinking about how do we set kids on a track that we want them to succeed as adults, we want to make their lives as adolescents as normal as possible. And I think of isolation and solitary confinement as really the absolute opposite of that.
So a lot of the studies around this and the research around this, congressionally mandated audit of restricted housing, federal prisons, for example, I'm talking about adults, juveniles, et cetera, published last year, found that roughly 60% of the inmates whose solitary cases were reviewed had serious underdiagnosed or untreated mental illnesses. So people who already are suffering from mental illnesses, when they're placed in solitary, how does it affect them?
So we know that adolescents in facilities tend to have much higher rates of mental health problems in general. They come in with us, they come from environments where they've experienced lots of different types of trauma, and so they're undiagnosed and underdiagnosed and therefore not treated mental health conditions. And so you're starting out already with a real propensity toward some of these serious mental health symptoms. And so when you put young people into these settings, it either can exacerbate existing problems, or for some kids it can trigger new problems. And those are things that don't necessarily, and most of the time, do not just disappear once they end up in a new setting. They can be with these, once they're triggered or exacerbated, they can continue with them long term. And I think just one more piece of that is that I think one of the things this highlights is not just the short-term immediate impact of solitary confinement, which is certainly a major risk, especially when you think about suicidality, but also the long-term impact of it in the future when these kids become older adolescents and adults.
Thank you. So we're going to move to Marsha Levick and talk about some of the other things that have happened around juvenile justice within the last year or so. The Supreme Court ruled this year that juveniles sentenced to mandatory life imprisonment must have a chance to argue for their release. Many of the 1,200 to 1,500 affected are concentrated in Pennsylvania and 2 other states. Philadelphia is gearing up to retry and resentence those juvenile inmates. Are there cases that are going through the courts now that deal with the issue of juvenile solitary confinement, cases that could wind up in the Supreme Court?
So, as when Richard started his remarks, he talked about his experience at Greater today, where you had the opportunity to meet with and photograph Ligon, who is actually the longest-serving juvenile lifer in the country. So he has been imprisoned for a crime that he committed, as a juvenile homicide that he committed when he was 15 years old, for longer than anybody else in the country. And Pennsylvania is dealing with the largest population of juvenile lifers across the country. We have 500 here in the state, and 300 who were sentenced out of Philadelphia. I do think that piece of litigation, the Supreme Court's ruling that is requiring that these individuals be resentenced, is a part of this larger conversation that we're having about criminal justice reform and that we're having about solitary confinement. The question of how solitary confinement as an issue of litigation, how it's fared in the courts, has been actually kind of interesting and in some respects disappointing. We are a country, based on the fact, I think, Solomon, to start out with your comments, we incarcerate 2.3 million people in this country, more than any other country in the world, substantially more than any of countries that we would consider our peers around the world. We are a country that believes in punishment, that believes in very strict correctional philosophy, and that believes in treating individuals in a very harsh and in many respects a very inhumane way. The courts have been tolerant of solitary confinement, unfortunately. For adults, we've had some settlements in recent years where we have seen progress being characterized as reducing the period of permissible solitary confinement from being measured in decades to being measured in years. So in Pelican Bay, we can no longer naturally and automatically expect that individuals could be subjected to periods of solitary confinement for 10 years or more. After 2 years, we need to reevaluate their cases. I don't think that anyone in this room would necessarily think that that was progress. For children, we have a different lens through which we look at the work. Obviously, listen to what we've heard this evening. There's nothing productive, there's nothing protective, nothing positive that comes from placing children in solitary confinement. But the courts have not been that quick to respond. We had Juvenile Law Center litigated on behalf of 2 young men, 2 16-year-old boys who were placed in solitary confinement in the New Jersey juvenile justice system. They've been placed in solitary in a cell exactly the size of the cell upstairs, one of them 7 months, almost without interruption and with absolutely nothing available to him in terms of any kind of audible, visual, human stimulation whatsoever. We settled that case for monetary compensation for that young man. New Jersey has changed its permissible limits on solitary confinement. It now measures those limits in days rather than weeks or months. But of course, what President Obama said in his executive order, the standard that we think must be one that guides our work going forward, is really no solitary confinement at all, except in the context of thinking of it as a cool-down period, a timeout, where you may separate someone from population for an hour or 2 hours, at most 3 hours, allow whatever the agitating factor is that is creating risk of harm in the facility, that is jeopardizing potential safety in the facility, and as soon as that is removed, as soon as that is suppressed, you turn the individual to general population. We have not seen this case go before the U.S. Supreme Court yet. Justice Kennedy, in an opinion 2 years ago, actually invited the bar to bring this issue before the U.S. Supreme Court because I think he's someone who recognizes he has an interest in international law. I suspect he is aware that the international human rights community condemns the use of solitary confinement and very specifically condemns it with respect to children and would characterize it as torture. So I think that it is an issue where we're seeing some progress in state legislatures, obviously some progress at the federal level, but I would expect that we will see opportunities for more litigation going forward.
Yeah, and that was what I was jotting down. Great minds think alike. The executive branch has acted on juvenile justice through this executive order from the president. The judicial branch has acted with the Supreme Court ruling on these life sentences. What's with the legislative branch?
Legislatures, that's a great question. I don't know if there are any prosecutors in the room, forgive me. But in our legislatures across the country, it's not limited to Pennsylvania, district attorneys carry an enormous amount of weight and influence. And so long as they carry that influence, it is difficult to move legislation that really aims at radically changing. And I think we're talking about radical transformation here. We're not looking for incremental change when we're trying to upend what are extraordinarily inhumane practices, as you have heard someone bear witness to this evening. I think the political will is not there in the ways that we need it. For all of the bipartisan effort that has been driven and directed toward reducing rates of incarceration, we need to be able to focus that energy and that interest on really looking inside the prison and looking at how we're treating people.
Right. Johnny Perez, the Obama administration had this issue on its radar screen in the summer of 2015. They asked the Justice Department to review the policy before issuing the order to stop juvenile solitary confinement in federal prisons. What would you, as someone who's experienced this, say to the next administration to convince them to make the elimination of juvenile solitary confinement a priority?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think about a few different things which I jotted down. First thing that comes to mind is incrementalism, where we change this small piece of the puzzle, but the entire picture still remains the same. Like you mentioned earlier, only the legislation really only affected, as of the turn of the year, 20-something kids, close to 30 kids. 26. 26, thank you. And, of course, on the surface it looks great, and of course we definitely want that on the federal level, and of course he's limited by what he can do, but there's still kids being placed in solitary, there's still people being placed in solitary. The other day I read an article about the young kid in Massachusetts, 15 years old, gets sent to the box for 50 days for throwing spitballs. Last time I checked, 15-year-olds, that's what they do. I know some adults that don't spitballs, but that's what they do. So we've gotten to a point in our country where we are actually punishing kids for being kids, right? So I'll definitely warn against that. And one of the ways I think I'll come back to that is, which might be a little risque in space, but this is the dichotomy between adults and juveniles, right? We say adults, juveniles should be in solitary, and we're saying that adults belong there. And, I always think about, Obama mentioned, he said, kids have the capacity to change, and last time I also checked, so do adults. I think that part of the problem is having a clear definition about exactly what solitary is, right? And we've heard panelists say before, we have different names, right? Administrative segregation, solitary PC, protective custody, special housing units, all these different names are like the same thing. So we ban solitary, but we still keep people in IPC, or we keep people protective custody, we keep people back, or we put them in solitary, we take them from one facility to another. And then in jail, someone is completely different because you haven't convicted, you're just detained. So have a clear-cut definition of solitary that includes all people that are in solitary-like conditions can definitely move the need forward and move the conversation forward. Lastly, I want to add that, between policy and practice is this space, right? And the reason there's this huge space is because we have people in this nation are writing policies about people who they have never come in contact with, will never come in contact with, and probably don't even care about coming in contact with them, right? So it makes sense if you're going to create a way to make the best tomatoes in the world, you want to invite farmers in, right? So I always mention that you want to include the voice of the people that are directly affected when you designing these policies, when you're involved, when you're creating these legislation, in order to make the policy the most effective policy possible. I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, all right. Well, I want to thank our panelists for this portion. Give them a hand, please. And now it is your opportunity to pose your questions, and I believe the questions are being submitted to me now. Okay. So I will pose this question, and we'll treat this like a political debate and just let you talk over each other. No, I'm kidding. So the first question is, what can I do to help end solitary if I'm a regular citizen with no involvement in juvenile justice? And I'll give that one first to Marsha.
I was hoping you'd give it to Johnny, but no, I think it's a welcome question. I appreciate someone wanting to know what you can do. We each have a role to play, and how we choose to engage may depend either on what our professional opportunities are or what our community engagement opportunities are. Certainly, as you heard this evening, there are ways to change solitary confinement through our various branches of government, through the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and the executive branch. We live in a state that is a very Republican state. We have both of our houses of our General Assembly are dominated by Republicans. However, there is also a bipartisan movement across the country that has frankly been led by a conservative right-on-crime movement that has been promoting fairly progressive, and I say that with all seriousness, criminal justice reform policies. And so I think one of the ways to think about how you can get engaged in a very basic way is really thinking about how you utilize your political power, how you utilize your opportunity to cast a vote at the ballot box, because the legislature has an enormous amount of authority to change what happened in our institutions and in our facilities. And this is one, I actually agree with Richard. It should be low-hanging fruit, and I actually think it is low-hanging fruit. Who thinks it's a good idea to lock kids in a closet? And if we can't communicate that message, then if we can't win in courts, then maybe we can win in our legislators.
I'm going to move into the next question. How do you see the role of research and data versus impacted youth and family complementing each other or working together? And I will get that into Dr. Goldstein.
Sure. So I think research tells us a lot about what the impact of these kinds of situations and experiences on young people. And that information can go a long way, especially towards legal arguments. I mean, JLC uses social science research quite a lot in a lot of your arguments, but it doesn't have a face to it. So as you talked about the public power, really, in thinking about this, yes, it's helpful to know the negative, traumatic impact of solitary confinement on individuals. It's great to know that it deprives the adolescent brain of important stimulation for development, but doesn't put a human face on it. The stories that you hear from individuals who go through this, or their families who are suffering along with them, really is invaluable in making it relatable and making you imagine what it's like to take your child or your sibling and put them in a closet and lock the door for a really long time. And those two things, I think, are important together to move these efforts forward.
Someone asked the question,